Hello everyone, it's Becca from Becca Books and Bujo, and it is time to go through my reading stats for 2023. Today we're combining two of my favorite things, books and numbers. We get to talk about all of the stats that went along with my reading for the year. So, first of all, I just always love to go through what Goodreads has to say about my reading because I track my reading religiously on Goodreads. So it says my 2023 year in books, I read 140 books, and that amounted to 46,845 pages. That's phenomenal. I'm so proud of myself for that. That's the most I've ever read, I think, in any given year, and so that's awesome. The shortest book I read in 2023 was The Hill We Climb by Amanda Gorman, clocking in at 29 pages. And the longest book I read was The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt, which was 864 pages. My average book length was 334 pages. That seems about right. Anywhere between 300 and 400 pages, I would say, is my average read. The book that was most shelved by people was It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. That was a reread for me this year, but still. And the least shelved was Toddlers Are A-Holes by Bunmi Laditan. That's not surprising either. I don't think I know anybody who's read this book, but it was funny because I'm raising two toddlers and they can be tricky. My average rating, now this is Goodreads standards. I track in my spreadsheet by half stars, and so we'll see what my more precise average rating was, but according to Goodreads it was a 4.0, which is awesome. That's, I think, the highest I've ever had. I think it was 3 I should get my last year's journal. I'll get it in a second, but I think it was 3.7 last year, so that's awesome. Going up. And the highest rated on Goodreads that I read was A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas. Of course, of course. Okay, so that's everything according to Goodreads. And now I'll be looking at my spreadsheet. I will just put some screenshots of my spreadsheet graphs and such here when I'm talking about them, but I have this great spreadsheet that was created by Allie from Hardback Hoarder, and so I love this spreadsheet. I will put her video down below where she has all of her spreadsheet information. I lied. Before we get into my spreadsheet, I just wanted to kind of do some comparisons to 2022. I read 128 books in 2022, so we read 12 more books. One per month. Awesome. An additional one per month. I read 41,487 pages, so I definitely upped my pages by about 5,000 pages, which, you know, equals those 12 books pretty easily. My average length of a book was 326, so I actually read longer books in 2023, that would say. My shortest book was 48 pages, so I actually read a shorter book, and my longest book was 980 pages, so I read a shorter, longer book in 2023. Okay. Now we'll go and we'll maybe refer back to last year's stats and things, but let's just jump in. So my spreadsheet says I read 145 books, and that's because I included DNFs in my spreadsheet. I didn't rate those, obviously, but I DNF'd 5 books this year, which is the most I've ever DNF'd in any given year. So that's good. I'm proud of myself for doing that, and I hope to continue to do that because I want to read books that I want to read and want to enjoy. I also think I'm better at choosing books that work for me nowadays, and so that's great. Okay. How do I don't even know where to start. Okay. Let's just jump into ratings. We saw that Goodreads gave me a 4.0 average rating, but according to my spreadsheet, I have a 4.1 average rating. 41 of my reads were 5 stars. That's phenomenal. That is 29.3% of my reading, which is great. As for 4.5 and 4 stars, that adds up to 64 reads, which is more or less 46% of my reads. That's also wonderful. I want half of my reads to be 4 stars or greater, and I mean, with this pie chart, it looks like 75% of my reads were 4 stars or higher. Those are such great numbers. I'm so pleased. I had 12 3.5 stars, 18 3 stars, so 30 in the 3-star category, adding up to about 20% of my reads. And then I only had 2 2.5 stars and 3 2 stars. I don't really rate books 1 or 1.5 stars because those would likely just have been DNFs in the first place. So this is a great pie chart. I am so pleased with how this turned out. Just looking at last year, 2022, my average rating was a 3.66, and so I greatly improved my average rating. 21% of my reads were 5 stars, and in 2023, we saw that that was 29%. So yeah, things are just moving up for me, which is wonderful. Let's look at the genres that I read. It looks like my largest slice of the pie was romance this year, which isn't surprising. Usually I think it's been contemporary. My top 3 are always contemporary, romance, and historical fiction. We'll see if that works out that way in 2023, but that's what it always has been in the past. So romance beating out contemporary is a little different for me, but that's okay. So 25% of my reads were romance, 19% were contemporary, and 14% were historical. So indeed, those were my top 3 genres. Coming in at 4th was thriller reads at 10% of my reads, and then fantasy was my next highest, which is kind of crazy. 5% of my reads were fantasy, but that's great. One thing I just love to see in this is the variety. I love to read a variety of books and genres, and so I like seeing all of these genres represented in this pie chart. In this next pie chart, we will see where I read these books or how I read these books. 63 of my 140 books were audiobooks. So that's 45% of my reads, and that's good. I mean, I listen to a lot of books. I'm a mom of 2, I have a full-time job, and so I can read most of my books by listening and doing some other chore or activity. And so that feels fine to me. 30% were just physical, which I'm happy with. 43 books I read just physically. I would like to get that number a little bit higher maybe next year because I feel like the reading experience is just a little bit different when you actually are holding a book. Ebooks, strictly ebook, I read 6.4%, 9 of my 140, and then a mixture of physical. It's usually a mixture of physical and audio. That was 25 books, coming in at 17.9%. So I definitely listened to probably more than half of the books that I read in 2023. But again, that's the way I can consume this content, and that's okay with me. I am not disappointed in that whatsoever. Next up, we're looking at the audience that these books were geared toward. 65% of them were adult. That's not anything new. Middle grade was a large slice of the pie, 17.9%. That probably is because I participated so heavily in Middle Grade March in March, which is a fun readathon where you read mostly middle grade books. Well, you try to read all middle grade books. And then 13.6% was young adult. I have a little slice of new adult, and that's basically just Colleen Hoover because that's what I classify her books as. This one is really fun to look at, where I read my books from. The largest slice of the pie was owned books, which I am very proud of. I'm trying to read the books that I have on my shelves, and so having 40% of the books that I read being owned already is great. I did notice that I don't have bought on here, so some of these maybe I did buy in 2023, but I owned them also. So that's okay. Next largest slice was the library, which is good, 27.1%. Then tied is BookBox book, which are technically also owned books, but books I bought this year too, and Scribd or Everand. Those are tied. So yeah, I'm happy with this graph. I am pleased that most of them are owned, and I would love to get that owned slice even larger next year. Next up, we've got series stats. I mostly read standalone books, and this graph shows it. 67.9% of my reads were standalones, 28.6% were part of a series, and then 3.6% were companion, which I think were books by Helen Huang, mostly. And maybe I put Part of Your World in that category too, because those Part of Your World and Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. They have some similar characters, but you don't necessarily have to read one before the other. So that, I mean, that seems normal to me. Here is the most even pie graph you will ever see, pretty much. So these are the author status for me, so whether I had read them before or if they were new to me. 71 of the authors were new to me, and 69 were authors that I had read from before. So literally 50.7% and 49.3%. We couldn't have gotten closer. But I mean, I guess we could have gotten one book closer on each side, but pretty dang close. So that's fine. I mean, I love to read from authors that I've read from before, and I like to try new authors too. So I usually have an even split with this statistic. I always think that this pie chart is ridiculous to look at, but mostly I just like to see my largest chunk of the pie. And this year, actually, it was books from 2022 at 23.6%. These are publication dates, by the way, should have said. And then next up is 2023 at 17.3%. So I read a lot of new releases. And then it was 2021, 2019, 2020, and 2018. I mean, I read books that are rather current, so that's fine. The oldest book I read was, I think, from the 1800s. Yeah, 1813. I think that was The Swiss Family Robinson. I also like to look whether I read diversely or not, and mostly it's just if I read non-white authors. And so it looks like I read 47 books that were written by BIPOC authors, which amounted to 32%. That's pretty good. It should be higher, but I think that was way better than last year. Let me look. Not way better, but slightly better. Last year, 28.9% of my books were from BIPOC authors, so I went up by 3%, which is better. I am improving, but again, I just want to see that percentage rise every year. And then 48% of my books had LGBTQIA plus representation, which is good. What is the percentage there? That's not calculated. 34%. Again, could be higher, but it's just good to have this information in the back of my mind and paying attention to that as I choose my books. I love to go month by month to see how I read each month of the year. And so if you can see here, my best reading month was March. By amount of books, I read 20 books. And my worst reading month was July. I read 7 books in July. However, my best reading month as far as 5-star rating was February, because 7 of the 11 books I read were 5 stars. So that is off the charts. Yeah, so technically my best reading month amount-wise was March, but my best reading month 5-star-wise and content-wise then was February. What else do I like to look at? I reread 10 books this year, which seems like a lot. My spreadsheet says that I read 46,219 pages. I can't remember how that compared to Goodreads. Oh, really close. 46,219, and Goodreads says 46,845. So we're off by 600 pages, but that's okay. If we divide those 46,000 odd pages by 12 months, that means I read about 3,851 pages per month and about 126 pages a day. That's awesome. I think last year I read 114 pages per day, so I increased my average rating per day a little bit, which is awesome. This is the stat that is a little bit horrific. I listened to 876 hours of audiobooks, which equates to 36 and a half days of audiobook listening. Granted, I listen to audiobooks at 2 times, sometimes up to 3 times the speed, so I was only listening to books for 12 full days instead of 36. Okay, what else do I like to share? This is kind of fun. I bought 105 books this year, and out of those 105, I read 43% of them this year, so that's good. I probably should read more of the books I bought, but that's okay. And just a fun stat to end on, I have 245 unread books on my shelves. If you saw my entire unread TBR video, I included some borrowed books. Those are technically not owned, so I don't know why I included them, but I have 262 with those borrowed books. So we'll see at the end of next year if I can get that amount down. So that's what we've got for stats. Sorry it was all over the place, but that's just how my brain is nowadays. But I enjoy telling you all of these stats and going through them myself. I love to track my reading for some reason, and it's nice to have pretty pie charts to go along with it. So thank you so much for watching. Like this video on your way out. Consider subscribing to my channel if you would like to see more bookish and bullet journaling content from me, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!